putting it when I say we had probably.
Okay, well, I think we'll get started. I'm going to just mute everybody. Good evening and welcome to our third and final session of our Safer Scholar in Residence with our guest, Rabbi Daniel Nevins. It's really been wonderful having Rabbi Nevins, who taught us on Thursday evening and last evening, looking at how the technology of the internet interfaces with Jewish law and community. And then last night, which unfortunately I was unable to make of a wedding, but I heard many wonderful things, was on issues of halakha and human dignity as they play themselves out in various social questions of our day. Tonight we'll be focusing on the future of conservative Judaism, and Rabbi Nevins is in a unique position to be our guide for this conversation. Since 2007, he has served as the Pearl Resnick Dean of the Division of Religious Leadership at the Jacksonville Jewish Center, encompassing the Rabbinical School of JTS, the Editorial School, and the Center for Pastoral Education. Rabbi Nevins began his career in the rabbinate as a pulpit rabbi for 13 years in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And starting in just a few weeks now, he will be transitioning his career to the world of day school education at Golda Ak Academy in New Jersey. So it is a pleasure once again to welcome my classmate, my teacher, friend, to our community, even if it's only virtually, as opposed to in person, where we could extend a warm welcome.
Well, thank you so very much. And Rabbi Lubliner, your audio is a little bit shaky. I just want you to know that. I'm not sure if other people heard that also, but is my audio sounding okay to you though? Yeah?
Sounds okay.
Okay, good. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming back. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new names as well. I've really enjoyed the two sessions we've had. The first session, I used a PowerPoint presentation. The second one was much more like a lecture and discussion. I heard some people who had been at both, they preferred that. And so I'm going to do that more. We're not going to have the breakout sessions tonight. But I do want to hear your opinions. I'm sure that you've all got them on our subject. But I do have some introductory comments. As Rabbi Lubliner just mentioned, I'm about to make a career transition. I'm going from the end to the beginning in a way. I'm going from sort of the ultimate stage of Jewish education, the training of clergy. And yesterday we had our celebratory ordination of new rabbis and cantors. And I'm now going back to the beginning, to pre-K, GAN, and 1st through 12th grade education. And as you'll see, it's partially because I have a concern that the Jewish people in general, and the conservative movement in particular, is getting a bit shaky on the foundations. And we need to sort of rebuild the foundations in order to have a strong future. So I want to first begin with what is really good, and then we'll get to some of the more challenging things, and then we'll get into the discussion and strategies for how to strengthen this brand of Judaism, which we all are devoted to, and Judaism altogether, so that we can continue to play a vital role in the Jewish world. So here's the good. The good is that there are a lot of points of vitality in the Jewish, in the conservative Jewish movement. There are many synagogues, yours among them, I believe, that are vibrant synagogues that are have a broad spectrum of participation from young and old, that have, I don't know many that have a day school attached the way yours does, but there are a few others that have that. And then, of course, in addition to the synagogues, we've got the summer camp movement. And as you know, the Ramah system has been incredibly vibrant for a long time and has added new camps. Darom is no longer a new camp. It's added camps in Colorado and in Connecticut and in Northern California in recent years, and new day camps as well. One in DC is fairly new. And so we've got a network that we're investing in of young adults. And to be honest, our Ramah camps are attracting not only people who identify as conservative Jews, but also people whose families go to Orthodox synagogues or Chabad synagogues. I never know whether Chabad is Orthodox or its own thing, but we have people who go to those types of synagogues. We have people who go to no synagogues. We have Israelis who are not especially synagogue going, but are very keen about their Jewish identity. So the Ramah system and many of our synagogues are in fact thriving. JTS during my years has continued to draw outstanding students from our undergraduate division, Liss College, which actually just this month announced that it has its largest incoming class in many, many years. It had been averaging around mid-30s. Now it's upper 40s of the incoming freshman class at Liss College. And even though, the conservative movement is supposed to be dying, somehow no one's really told us at JTS, and we continue to get outstanding students and to compete against seminaries that are Orthodox or Reform or none of the above or all the above, like Hebrew College, which is sort of a trans-denominational school. So I want to share a little nachas with you. Forgive me, but you invited me for something, so I'm going to this is not nachas yet, that's the tzuras, but here's the nachas. Do you see Shani Abramowitz and Vicky Bedeau there? Yeah? Can you see? All right, so this is the program from yesterday's graduation at JTS, and just showing you who these students are who just graduated. Shani Abramowitz grew up Orthodox, actually, in Chicago. She's taking a pulpit in Lexington, Kentucky, solo pulpit with her husband. Vicky Bedeau grew up non-Jewish in Budapest, but with some Jewish ancestry, converted to Judaism through an incredible summer camp and an exchange program, and she's going to be an assistant rabbi in Arlington, Virginia, with her husband who's working also in the Jewish world. Emily Cobert grew up in Dallas, Texas, and is going to Middletown, New York, a solo pulpit. Now this is a cantor, Mira Davis, who grew up in New Jersey, actually is a graduate of the school I'm about to take over, and she's going to be a rabbi a cantor in Long Island. This guy, Colin, he goes by the Hebrew name Chaim Eliezer. He's like an Eagle Scout who grew up not Jewish in North Carolina, and obviously he's Jewish, and now he's going to be a solo rabbi in New Jersey, in Aberdeen. Ben Fried grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and is going out to Louisville, Kentucky to be a solo rabbi, just got married this week. Marcel Hull grew up in Brazil and came to America, and she's going to be working with JASA, which is an organization that helps older adults here in New York. Margot actually also grew up not Jewish, interestingly, and she's going to be working for Trua, which is a social justice organization. Eliana grew up in the Oranges in New Jersey and is going to be a cantor in South Orange. Noam Kornskold, who your rabbis both will know the family name, but he grew up son of a rabbi in New Jersey and is going to be working for Camp Ramah in the Berkshires and starting a doctoral program. Deborah Megdal, brilliant Yale Law School a student who graduated and worked in a firm in New York and clerked and then decided she didn't want to be a lawyer, she wanted to be a rabbi. She's from Los Angeles, and she's going to be a rabbi in Bethesda, Maryland. Blair Nosowich grew up in Michigan in the Reform movement, actually, and became observant, and she's going to be working in Michigan in my old synagogue at Adat Shalom. Ben Perlstein grew up, he grew up in New Jersey, right? And he's going to be a chaplain in a hospital here in New York, at New York Presbyterian. Kevin Peters grew up non-Jewish on Staten Island. He's going to be an assistant rabbi up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Jonathan Posner grew up in Chicago and is going back to Chicago for an outreach organization called Beis Hillel. Daniela Risman is a cantor now, and she's going to be working as a cantor in West Hartford in Connecticut. Jacob Sandler, another cantor, grew up in Rockland County, is going to be a cantor at North Suburban in Chicago. And Erica grew up in Los Angeles and is going to be a cantor in, maybe she's going to be in Long Island too. Yeah, Rockville Center, there it says it. Abby Weber grew up in Philadelphia area, and she's going to be a rabbi in Philadelphia. And Maya Zinka grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Both of her parents are rabbis. Her mother, Elke Abramson, is the head of the Wexner Foundation, and she is going to be a rabbi at the University of California in Berkeley at their Hillel. So just to give you a sense, this is not just for me, 20 new leaders. And you may have noticed that quite a few of them grew up not in the conservative movement, and frankly not even Jewish, and came to Judaism through our movement, have studied Torah intensively, not just for 5 years at JTS, but for many years before that. And so when you ask me why I am an optimist, why, the glass is always half full for me, it's because I've been working in leadership and I see incredible people, incredible talent, incredible devotion and creativity and wisdom and kindness and skill, and they're going to do great work. I also noticed that the class was a good-sized class for JTS in recent years, and they all got jobs, and they all got great jobs, and there were plenty of other jobs left that they didn't take. And so right now I'd say we're kind of right-sized in terms of putting out leadership. They're working in synagogues, they're working in camps, they're working in hospitals and organizations and day schools and camping. So it's a pretty impressive group. So that's the sort of the scene in the United States, at least, is not so bad. We do have synagogues that are failing, of course, but that's been the case for many decades. Jews move. I used to be a rabbi in Detroit where there were a lot of conservative synagogues. And I remember one of the smaller towns in Michigan, I think it was Flint, but it might have been Saginaw or Bay City or one of the other communities that used to have a larger Jewish community and now couldn't afford to keep a rabbi. And they wanted us to sort of have the Detroit community pay for rabbis to go out to shore up these other smaller communities, which we did offer to help out with. But they said, it can't be that there will not be a Jewish community in Flint, let's say. And Roger's on the phone here, so he knows the Michigan landscape. And I thought, well, if you spin the globe, you'll see many places where Jews used to live and don't live now. And we are a wandering people. The only place we have a permanent connection to really is Israel. Everywhere else we've arrived. There weren't, I don't know when the Jews first arrived in Jacksonville, but it can't be much more than 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago. 150? What do you think? All right. So God willing, it'll go on for many, many more years. But we understand. One thing I saw in the Midwest was that a lot of the smaller communities all their young Jews were leaving and moving to the larger cities, to Detroit, mostly to Chicago, Minneapolis, the big cities where young Jews wanted to live, and they were no longer living in the small towns that had been set up by Jewish peddlers and then hardware store owners and dry goods shopkeepers and the many people who built sort of middle American towns, the merchants and then the early professionals. Those people don't want to live in those small towns anymore. They're moving to the larger cities, and so that's part of what's going on. We in the conservative movement happen to have a lot of real estate in places that are emptying of Jews, and so I see some of our decline, in terms of our institutions, is simply being a right sizing, a shifting of resources to where the people are. That said, well, I don't want to get to the bad part yet. I'm still on the good part, so don't want to rush myself. A few other good signs. One, the largest growth in the Jewish world has been the unaffiliated, and when you look at what an independent minion looks like in this country, it often looks a lot like a conservative minion. That is to say, it's egalitarian but has a Hebrew-based service. Not as much of the reform, the guitar and singing songs mostly in English. It's got more of a conservative style, but it's fully egalitarian and gay inclusive and inclusive of other people who were previously excluded. So for example, my son goes to Brown University in Rhode Island, and they have a conservative minion on Friday night, but Saturday morning they have an independent minion. But that independent minion uses conservative prayer books and chumashim and follows the same model that you would find at a conservative synagogue or a Camp Ramah. So there are some independent organizations like Hadar, which is a yeshiva here in New York, which has a whole network of minions around the country. And they too are egalitarian, but traditional or halachic, they'll say. And so, to my mind, if there's vitality in the young sector, in the type of Judaism that we're living and that we're teaching, but it's not identifying itself with a label, conservative Judaism, well, the label's not my key concern. My key concern is that people are studying Torah and they're practicing mitzvot and they're creating communities that everybody can join. And so those are all good signs. Some other good signs are on the international scene. Outside of the United States, in Canada, conservative Judaism is usually called Masorti Judaism. And it's actually, the movement's doing pretty well in parts of Europe, in parts of Latin America, and certainly in Israel, where it's actually growing. Masorti UK is really booming. A bunch of our recent graduates are now in England and doing very, very good work there. We've got good communities in Stockholm and Paris and other points around the continent. And in Israel, we keep founding new organizations, and so those are all the good signs. But, I've got to be honest with you, the signs are not all good. And when Rabbi Lubliner asked me to talk about this, I kind of winced. I said it's not my favorite topic. And unfortunately, I got some new material to work with. The Pew Center, as you know, is a research center in America that does studies of American culture and politics and demographics and so on. And it's done a series of studies of the American Jewish population. It used to be that the federations of America were responsible. You probably remember the famous 1990 study of North American Jewish population study. Well, the Pew has sort of taken over that project, and they put out a major report in 2013, and then another major one came out just last week, or May 11th, so maybe 2 weeks ago, about Jewish Americans. If you look on the web, you'll find, if you go to the Pew Research Center, a page that looks like this. It looks all fuzzy in my, I guess you can't see it. Anyway, it's called Jewish Americans in 2020. And the headline is, U.S. Jews are culturally engaged, increasingly diverse, politically polarized, and worried about anti-Semitism. So this is sort of the executive summary. It's about I think about 30 pages. But you can also download the full PDF, which is about 250 pages. Some of the big headline news is that in some ways, we've held steady, the American Jewish community has, from 2013 to 2020. We still remain around 7 million people in this country who identify as Jewish. And that includes both people who identify as Jews by religion and Jews with no religion. So somebody, let's say I've got someone in my extended family who was raised Jewish, went to a Reform synagogue growing up, but grew up and had no more interest in that. And I don't think has been in a synagogue or observed a Jewish holiday or done any Jewish activity except coming to some of our events in his adult life. So he, I would imagine, would identify as Jewish with no religion. Right? But the main thing that's been noticed is that there's a growing division in the American Jewish community. One area of growth is in Orthodox Judaism, and the other area of growth is in no affiliation Judaism. And that's really the big story. And then another big divide is political. The vast majority of American Jews, non-Orthodox Jews, identify as Democrats in American politics, but the vast majority of Orthodox Jews identify as Republicans. Of course, I have an Orthodox friend in Cleveland who voted for Biden, and there are plenty of conservative Jews who voted for Trump, but the preponderance is a division that way. Non-Orthodox Jews are still preponderantly voting Democratic, and Orthodox Jews, especially the Haredi world, which is the largest sector and the fastest growing sector, are preponderantly Republican. That might change, by the way. It's kind of interesting. Here in New York City, you may have heard, we have a mayoral race that's about to happen, elections about to happen. And even though it's just the Democratic primary, it's being treated as the election because there's no Republican of stature like a Michael Bloomberg to run against them. And Andrew Yang, who is a neophyte politician, has never run for office before, well, except for as president, but has never held office before. He's been courting the ultra-Orthodox community. Their one cause is yeshivas, they say, and he seems to have traction, and he's offering them money and a hands-off approach to their yeshivas. So I'm going to screen share again and show you, let's see Kevin again, but now let's look here. So this is on the full report. You can see it's 248 pages. This is page 45. So I want to look at this table with you, right? Let's unpack this table for a minute. Is there a way for me to do I think there's supposed to be like a button that goes color. One second. Is there the annotator? Can you see that? Ah, good. Spotlight. I think I can do this. Does that work? Spotlight? Yeah, can you see like a little dot now? All right, whatever. Hopefully it helps. So the column, the Orthodox column, you can see that people raised Orthodox, today 94% of them still consider themselves to be Jewish. No surprise. And actually conservative, not too shabby. If you were raised as a conservative Jew, 93% still think that they're Jewish. Whereas with Reform, it's a bit lower. It's about 5 points lower to be 88%. If you were raised just Jewish, then not surprisingly, you've got a slightly lower identification as a Jew today. But look at this. If you were raised Orthodox, 67%, 2/3 of people raised Orthodox still are Orthodox. And in the Reform movement, people raised Reform, 66%, a comparable number, still consider themselves to be Reform. But in the conservative movement, only 41% of our people consider themselves to be conservative. So that's worrying, that the Orthodox and the Reform seem to be retaining their total numbers, whereas the conservative seem to be shedding numbers. Now, actually, this isn't entirely accurate. It's unfortunately worse than it seems. So I'm sorry, I'd like to tell you that it's better than it seems, but it's worse than it seems because these are aggregate numbers of the entire population. But if you were to look at people, younger Jews, people under 50 or even under 30, you would find that the conservative movement is only claiming about 8% of people who are under 30, right? So that's very bad. Where does the population shift? It almost all shifts. On this chart, it's to the right, but we conventionally speak about the Orthodox is to the right and the Reform is to the left. So just imagine it's mirror, okay, easier. But most of the flow is from the Orthodox to the conservative to the Reform. So among the missing, Jews, so if you were to say there's 93% of people raised conservative still identify as Jewish, okay, and then you would subtract 50% and you get to 41. So where are those 50%? So 2% of them have gone Orthodox, and we all know people like that, but they're a very small part of the picture. 30% have gone Reform, 15% are just Jews, 3% might be Reconstructionist or Renewal or some other type, and 7% say they're not Jewish at all. Now, I personally do have a slightly more optimistic interpretation of this data, and for me what that is that many people who say they're Reformed Jews don't in fact belong to a Reformed temple. In other words, if you are doing a survey and I ask you, what kind of a Jew are you? Orthodox, conservative, Reform, something else? And the person knows, well, I eat pork, I don't, I eat bread on Passover, I don't pray, I don't really believe in God, all those things. Often I think those people will identify with the Reform movement. They'll say, I'm a Reform Jew. That's where everything's optional, right? And very few people who do not practice sort of some version of the Torah and the mitzvot that we teach in the conservative movement identify as conservative Jews. And if you were to look at affiliation numbers, people actually belonging to synagogues, I don't have that number here, but I believe that the conservative and Reform are much closer, right? So whereas it's something like the aggregate number of Jews, American Jews who identify as conservative right now is 17%, whereas Reform it's around 37%. So there are about twice as many people who identify as Reform versus conservative. But if you were to look at people who actually join a synagogue and do something about it, it's not quite even, but it's not that skewed. It's something more like, a few percentage points separating us. So that's interesting. Why is it that the brand of Reform Judaism is more palatable? Either it's because it's a positive brand. Americans in general have become more liberal in their religious beliefs, and also American Jews, since I told you if they're not Orthodox, mostly vote Democratic, they might hear the word conservative and just say, I don't identify with that politically, and they may not even know what the religious term means. So that's a little bit there, and the report notes that if you look here for a second, hang on, move this. Compared to the 2013 study, roughly half of people raised in conservative Judaism now identify with Reform, don't affiliate with any branch of Judaism, or are no longer Jewish. So that's a pretty alarming number. On the other hand, people who are raised conservative do tend to continue to identify as Jewish as much as Orthodox Jews do. So that is what I wanted to share. There's obviously a lot more data in a 250-page report, and if you're looking for a cheerful evening, you can read the whole study. So I wanted to share those parts. So just to review, I do have a positive attitude. I see a lot of vitality in our core products, our synagogues. Many of them are flourishing. Our summer camps are actually expanding. Our seminaries are doing well. Our day school movement is a little challenged, and the day school that I'm moving to is at around 460, 470, down from about 550 a few years ago. But apparently there's been a bit of a rebound because of COVID, perhaps, where a lot of the public schools were closed, and all of a sudden families decided that they wouldn't mind paying the tuition to get their kid to be in school as they had happened. But for me personally, for Danny Nevins, leaving JTS, not Jacksonville Theological Seminary, but the Jewish Theological Seminary, there used to be another JTS that I think it was Jacksonville, but did they fold or something? I don't know. Whatever, they released the URL JTS.
Yeah, they it does not exist.
It does not exist. Oh well. Oh, by the way, should point out that the trends affecting conservative Judaism are also trends affecting American religion. I should say that, it's kind of obvious, but Protestantism, especially mainline Protestantism, is going through a huge decline right now. Much, much more rapid than we are. Like the Presbyterian churches and Methodists and a lot of the mainline Protestants, Congregationalists, Universalists, have been losing their members in a very rapid sense. The theory was that everyone was moving over to evangelical, but it seems that evangelicals, while they've been sort of holding their own, are not growing the way they were in the 80s and 90s. And in fact, are shedding some younger members, especially in the wake of the Trump years, when a lot of younger evangelicals said, listen, I have conservative Christian beliefs, but I don't identify with what this president is standing for. I'm not going to wade too deep into those waters. They're not our topic tonight. So they've been shrinking a little bit. And as you know, the largest group of Americans by religion is what are called the nuns, not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E-S, the people who have no religious affiliation at all. Also, it should be noted that the American population is beginning to stabilize and even decline a bit. The New York Times headline today was actually that global population is, for the first time in history, declining. Not only in the United States, but in Europe and in China, there have been major reversals of population growth. And while there are certain benefits to a smaller human population, on the economic level, at least, it's going to be problematic because young people are usually the economic engines, and they pay for those of us who want to retire and they do the jobs that we all depend on for the young. So sort of the demographic decline of conservative Judaism is in part connected to that trend line. And finally, I'll say that on the negative side, that the conservative movement tends to be older overall. Our median age is much older than the median age of the Orthodox. The Orthodox, with their large family sizes, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 children in a family, their median age, I think, is somewhere in the 30s, like low 30s. And the conservative movement's median age is in the upper 50s, as is Reform. So those are worrisome. So what is to be done? And I'm just going to say a few things, and then I'm going to open this up. And I hope that some of you have some thoughts about this, whether anecdotal, that this does sound correct, or grounds for optimism, we would all welcome. And then, and also then proposals, things that we could do. So here are my thoughts. First of all, we need to invest in intensive youth activism. Young Jews are not apathetic. Many of them are activists, and we need to be in those spaces. And it's sometimes a little uncomfortable because a lot of youth activism is more left of center than what a lot of conservative Jews where we're at. And I see this in my work, JTS, on issues about racial justice or about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other things. They tend to have views that are just a little bit to the left. And I believe as they grow older, they will grow a little more conservative, just as I have and many of you have. But still, if we want those people, then we have to be in the spaces where they are, whether it's political activist organizations like Trua or J Street, which is a pro-Israel, pro-peace organization. We have to also be in those spaces. I think that is one thing that's clear. We can't afford to just say, oh, those people they're misinformed or they're self-hating or something like that. We have to be able to reach them. We also need to invest in college campuses. To their credit, Chabad has invested beautifully in college campuses, but the conservative movement does not have any organized effort to support Jews on campuses. It used to be that the United Synagogue had a college division, but they let it go. They were hemorrhaging money. They couldn't do it all, so they just shut down their college outreach program. Now we at JTS have picked up some of the slack. We've had a grant the last 5 or 6 years from the Slivka Nadich foundations, and we've been sending students to about 12 different college campuses once a month typically. But a student visiting once a month is not the same as a permanent staff member. My middle child, my daughter Leora, who went to Brandeis, was at Brandeis University. You've heard of it. They have Jews there, right? There were 3 Orthodox rabbis and their wives were also functioning as Jewish professionals. So 6 Orthodox Jewish professionals serving the Brandeis campus, and 0 conservative rabbis, except the JTS student that we would send up once a month. So you figure, how do you compete that way? How do you rebuild your movement when you don't have representatives? Now, we do have some representatives in some college campuses, but we're falling behind. So that's one thing. Another thing, I think, is that conservative Judaism has the problem of a middle of the road movement, in that it's easier to define the extremes than the middle. It's easier to define what orthodoxy is. That's the Jews who believe that everything in Judaism has been the same forever, and you have to do everything, and no changes are allowed. No, not on gender, not on sexuality. We can be nice to people, but basically old-time religion. And reform is kind of easy to explain too. The center of authority is individual conscience. So Judaism is here to teach people sort of distinctive ideas and texts and practices. There's a lot of wisdom in it, but everyone gets to decide for themselves what they're going to actually do. Conservative is kind of in the middle. We've got a real sense of pluralism. We welcome people of many different beliefs and many different practices. We do have a sense of core beliefs and practices, but we're not particularly judgmental, and we're very welcoming of everyone. And as a result, it's kind of hard for people to know exactly what we stand for. So I think clarifying beliefs and practices and advocating for them can be helpful. By the way, in the Pew survey, they asked young Jews who do not go to synagogue why they don't go to synagogue. And we rabbis have been asking ourselves that question for many years. And our assumption was because it's too expensive. Young Jews can get sticker shock when they see what the membership is. Or it's too foreign. There's all that Hebrew stuff and they just don't understand it. And so they stay away. Turns out that's not actually, neither of those factors are what young Jews say. Older Jews sometimes say that, but not younger Jews. Younger Jews say they don't find it spiritual enough by large margins. And so that indicates that, a style of religious affiliation that worked in earlier generations may not be working in younger generations. Older generations were accustomed to coming to synagogue as a type of Jewish cultural event, a political event, hearing sermons that would relate to the big news events of the week, that would speak about anti-Semitism and about Israel and about the Holocaust, about Jewish history, and those are very meaningful. And I think young Jews may care about those things, but what they really care about is spirituality. And for them, spirituality is not necessarily always distinctively Jewish. And so if they can find that, if they can find someone teaching them in a way that touches their soul in some way, that identifies with them, their own journey in life, and helps them feel seen. That's a very common term for young people today. I felt seen. Everyone wants to be recognized for what they're going through. And when they do, and when they hear someone who's giving them affirmation and guidance in their particular life, then they feel more spiritual. So that does seem to be a opportunity, a growth opportunity. In terms of our strengths, I do think that we conservative Jews have a lot to be proud of. People who come to our synagogues usually come looking for a substantial Jewish experience. And I think we should not apologize for that. We should make sure that it's high quality and it's exciting and it's spiritual and it's meaningful, but we shouldn't always be apologizing and trying to truncate everything. And I remember in my synagogue in Michigan, sometimes there would not be a bar mitzvah. Usually there was, but sometimes there would not be a bar mitzvah, and I would give a different kind of sermon. I would quote from the Talmud. I would have more Hebrew words. And I remember a congregant of mine, she would come up and would say, "You should speak that way every week." And I'd say, well, when we've got 500 guests many of them are not Jewish, I can't just quote the Talmud. And she said, "Yes, you can. We're your members. They're our guests. Teach to us, teach to your members, because we want to feel like when we came, we got an elevated Torah, not just one that was, sort of generic." And finally, I'd say that, and I see this in my own life, that when we commit to actual traditional practices, to Torah and mitzvot, then people feel that there is something authentic to what we're doing. And it's one of my challenges going into this new job in my day school, is that the prayer life has been allowed to kind of, from what I hear, I haven't witnessed it myself, but it's been allowed to sort of fade away. And it's been replaced with a lot of electives, art minion, meditation minion, walk in the park minion. Those are all nice things to do, but we've been sending a message that prayer, actual prayer, like saying the Shema and the Amidah, are not necessarily Jewish practices. The only thing that matters is having some quiet time in your day. And, and yet when the school offered more traditional prayer services, apparently it was popular with the students. So I'm not saying that I'm going to try to come and get rid of all those electives, but I am going to try to build up the sense of a substantial type of worship experience that people who are looking for that will find. And I believe that ultimately is what's going to be our salvation, is offering people a substantial, deep, challenging religious experience. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've talked for quite some time now, and open it up. If anybody has I didn't mean to mute myself. So we're going to open it up for discussion. Feel free to raise your hand, physical or virtual. If you prefer to put something in chat, you can do that too. And I guess the question I'm asking is, what's your sense of the trend lines of conservative Judaism? What are you seeing in your community or in your expanded network, which might include other communities? And what do you think are the best strategies for keeping ourselves vibrant going into the future? Floor is open. Susan Needle, I see you.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me, I used to teach Sunday school and Hebrew school. I actually did it for many years before I moved to Jacksonville, and then Jacksonville, I did it for a short time. But one of the things that always struck me when I was growing up, when I went to Hebrew school and Sunday school, the focus was on not just learning the prayers to be able to say them, but it was on learning what the meaning of the prayers was. And one of the things that struck me when I first moved to Jacksonville was that the focus was on getting the kids to be able to recite the prayers, like they would do speed races to see who could say them the fastest. But if I spoke to the kids and I said, now, what does that mean? They didn't have a clue. They were so focused on the Hebrew and being able to recite it quickly that it lost the meaning. And I think that was something, for me, it bothered me. It was kind of impactful. And when I used to teach Hebrew school, like back in Raleigh, North Carolina, under Dan Ornstein, he's in Albany, New York now. When Rabbi Dan was there, the whole focus was prayer book Hebrew, as in, let's make sure that we understand the root words and really understand what the Hebrew means, so that then when the kids would get more facile with their Hebrew, they were facile both with saying it and understanding it. And when we think about the spiritual nature, of kids saying that, oh, they don't feel spiritually connected, is it because it became just saying the words versus understanding what they're saying? I just wonder that, to me.
It's an interesting point. I mean, look, we try to achieve a balance. Day school is a little bit of a different situation. Unfortunately, part of the trend has been for us across the country to offer fewer days. So for many years, we were a 3-day-a-week religious school, and some years ago, with a lot of push from parents and our educational leadership, we went to a 2-day-a-week model, again, as part of a larger trend. And to be honest with you, as one of our members, Larry Goldberg, likes to say, and I love to quote him, you can never offer too little Jewish education. And that there is some truth to that. So there is a kind of triaging. I would be less than honest if I didn't say that there are some parents who would like to make Wednesdays optional, which isn't going to happen. But all of that being said, with less time on the table, we were able to preserve not quite a 6-hour week. It's more like a 5-hour week. But being able to teach language, we know pedagogically that going from less time for more days is a better formula for being able to teach any language and its meaning. So Rabbi Rosenblum probably could answer more to the point than I, because she's on the front lines as our religious school director, if she wants to.
Having trouble unmuting.
She's muted.
Be able to unmute.
It wouldn't let me unmute, but thank you for giving me the power to do that. Yes, I'll say what you said, Rabbi, is very true. And what I'll add, Susan, is that we have actually started using some new curricula that do work on teaching the meaning of the prayers. So my hope is that after a few years of using this curriculum, it will not be the case that the students are only working on how fast they can each say all the prayers. But after having only been in the school for 1 year, I can say that that curriculum so far has started to impact at least some of our students.
And if I just piggyback one more thing, honestly, the best way of teaching context is for kids to actually come and daven in real time, or come to youth Shabbat services where things like prayer meaning and why we do what we do and the choreography of what we do, that's done in real time. And that's perhaps something to add to the list of things to address and overcome. We have, prayer can't ultimately be an educational classroom experience. It has to be experiential. I understand that, kids of any age aren't going to be looking for what Abraham Joshua Heschel calls radical amazement. But we have to be able to find opportunities in real time, like on Shabbat, when an hour and a half focused on prayer in community moves from educational to experiential. And I would love to, again, this is, always that balance of, but I would love to see coming to shul on Shabbat to be, an understood expectation / requirement. But those kinds of requirements, when they're imposed from above, often are less successful. I have many Orthodox family members. I very proudly, years ago, told them about all of our requirements for kids to do, a certain number of mitzvot projects, and they had to come to Shabbat services, X percentage. And he said, "Oh, requirements, very nice. We have them too. They come from God." It's ouch. But having grown up with that side of the family, there is, there's something where you go to shul on Shabbat because you go to shul on Shabbat versus you have a requirement that you have to come to Shabbat X number of times as an educational prerequisite. But a great point, Susan, and one well taken.
Can I ask a question? Yes, okay. I actually had a question before. I was curious about, our synagogue happens to have a fairly robust Foundations of Judaism class with a good number of people who are looking to become Jewish and join the Jewish community. I don't know the trends around the country. Other rabbi might know more about that, as your history with all of the conversion in the movement. I don't know if you, Rabbi Nevins, have a pulse on that or not, but we do have growing numbers of members of our community who are joining the Jewish faith. That's my one question. The other thing I wanted to say is that when I attended the Golda Ak Academy, before it became Golda Ak, I did enjoy both kinds of services. We did have Minion that was regular Minion, and we did have musical Minion, which was still prayers. It was just the parts you could sing. And I learned new tunes, and I now on Saturday afternoons teach people some of those tunes. So I'll say there is a value in having both of those pieces. So I do hope that you are able to get back to some of that traditional prayer while also having some of the elective type things. I think there's a good balance you can get there. But my question was more about the convert kind of piece of the puzzle.
Well, thank you for both points, and I agree with you. And also, my leadership style is not to sort of impose, like this is what we're doing now. Everything was wrong. Now, here comes the new guy, and he's going to tell everyone what to do. So, it's just something that I'll be looking for opportunities to sort of give people more access to the tradition, while also, having places where, like, for song and movement and meditation where they can experience more. In terms of conversion, anecdotally, I've heard that the conservative movement does most of the conversions in the country. That in the Reform movement, once they started doing interfaith marriage, there are some Reform synagogues that still do quite a few conversions, but there's no longer the same motivation since most Reform rabbis do interfaith marriages. And I think that just sociologically, American Jews, perhaps who were getting married in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, the older family relatives members, couldn't abide that their so-and-so is marrying a non-Jew. And so there was a lot of pressure if they fell in love with someone who's not Jewish for that person to become Jewish. Today, there isn't that pressure. Not only today, even before. I remember in Michigan, there was a woman who was not Jewish, who was married into a very large Jewish family, a very prominent Jewish family. And she made an appointment with me. And she said, I've been married, so-and-so and I have been married for, 15 years. They're a great family. They love me. They're wonderful. Can I just ask you, Rabbi, a question? Is it possible for me to convert to Judaism? And I said, well, of course it's possible. She said, because no one's ever offered that as an option, and everyone was being so polite and affirming and warm that nobody ever said, by the way, if you are interested in being part of this, we've got a way of doing that. So sometimes, but I do think that the largest number of conversions are happening under our auspices. In the Orthodox world, there are also conversions, but not as many. Part of that is making the threshold very high. Part of it might be theological. The Chabad movement seems to have a doctrine of souls, which is not so compatible with conversion. And part of it might just be that they're an more insular community and not as welcoming. And also that very few Orthodox Jews wind up dating people from other traditions if they still want to stay Orthodox. So yeah, I think that is a growth area for us. I've also noticed that it's funny. Rabbi Lubliner and I have a classmate who's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who's done a lot of conversions. And so about 20 years ago, a Messianic temple opened up in town, Jews for Jesus, And, we rabbis do not like that. I think we Jews don't really like that. We see it as dishonest. They claim to be Jewish. They're not really Jewish. They're really Christian, and so on. This rabbi told me, a lot of people have converted to Judaism from that temple. In other words, they were regular Christians who became interested in Judaism. The first place they found was this temple because it was Jewish, but it was also familiar to them. And then the more they learned about Judaism, the more they realized that they actually wanted to be Jews, not Christians. And so they found their way to the synagogue. There was almost no movement in the other direction of Jews who wanted to become Christians and who were going there. And actually somebody else told me this in a different city too, that the Messianic temple had turned into sort of a growth industry. But as a result, this rabbi was very careful that in the conversion process, it wasn't just understood, but it was required to be explicit that they disavowed any belief in Jesus as a Messiah or as a personal God and the divinity of Jesus any more than you or I are divine in the sense of that we were talking about last night, being made in the divine image. And so, he was careful about that. But so I do think that that's one of the areas of strength that we've got. And we're very proud. And Rabbi Jonathan Lubliner, with his Petach HaOhel book, really was, I don't think it's just a booklet. I think it's like a book, it's a major document, has been one of the rabbis who really led the way in increasing the quality of our efforts at bringing people to, to find shelter under the wings of the Shekhinah in the Jewish world. Are there other people who have questions or comments based on what I've said? Yeah, Wendy and Yaakov, it looks like.
When Susan was talking about teaching in Hebrew school, I think except for 2 or 3 other people, I've been here the longest. My children grew up at the center, and I've seen since the 70s how it's evolved. And when I taught in the after school Hebrew school, I discovered the kids could sing the prayers, but they couldn't read them. So the first thing I did was we stopped singing and we went back to reading. This was the after school Hebrew school. That was the difference between the day school and the much shorter amount of time that these kids had in learning Hebrew. But then it was also a requirement in order to attend youth conventions, they had to go to services. So we had a full house of kids on Shabbat that were there so they could go to conventions. And they couldn't get scholarships to camp or to Israel programs unless they had a good attendance record. Over the years, I've seen that diminish. I've seen confirmation disappear. And it's really bothered me because before the kids could get up and lead any of the services, you could see it changing when they did Havdalah and it Shalosh Sudot, after they couldn't, a lot of them couldn't lead the beer cod after a while. So I've seen a diminishing of the ability of our children, and I really feel like they've been cheated. I'm sorry, Rabbi, I love you, and you know that, but I just it distresses me.
Just one note: when the confirmation was this past Shabbat, and it has not disappeared.
Well,
So
it should do it, and it was 3 days. It was 2.5 days. So
right, I can tell you offline why that changed. But
I know, and
I
don't mean to point a finger at you, but I mean, it just bothers me. What can I tell you?
Well, if I could just defend your synagogue a little bit, I think what Rabbi Lubliner mentioned earlier is important to bear in mind. As he noted, across the country, families were reducing the amount of hours to make their kids available for Jewish education. And language learning is hard, as you all know. Anyone who's tried to learn a language, and we Americans are not especially gifted at acquiring languages. And so that's why the day schools are better for that kind of skill acquisition. But and I think it's also true that we started to emphasize different things, and it's not entirely bad. The kind of rote repetition that is necessary for some of the language skills was not so popular. And so it may have made the educators feel good that the kids could translate Modeh Ani or Shema Yisrael, but the kids sometimes felt unengaged, and so my impression is that children are generally happier with their educational experiences, even if parents like us fret that they're not gaining as many skills. So it's a difficult balance, but if you want your kids to really gain in Jewish comprehension, you have to find immersion experiences like summer camps and day schools where they can actually live it, all day long. That's what's going to make it different. All right, I see 3 virtual hands. So we got Susan, Etta, and Beth. And I see 1 physical hand too of Yaakov. So let's go in that order. Susan.
Was it me? Okay.
I think so.
Question. So do we have data? And sorry, I'm very analytical, but if you look at Camp Ramah, do we know, do the kids that are doing these immersive summers at Camp Ramah, what's the percentage of those kids? And I know I've had surveys in the past from my own kids, but what's the data show for these Camp Ramahniks? What percentage of them are staying affiliated as they turn into adults?
So I don't actually have that data. Sorry, I don't have that data handy, so I can't really answer that. My impression is it's very high, but they're not necessarily all affiliating with the conservative movement. Some people from the Ramah movement wind up affiliating the Orthodox world and others elsewhere. But yes, I think it's high, but I don't have the data. But now I want to go to Susan Lubliner, whose virtual hand is up. So I thank you, Susan Needle. Okay, go ahead.
Just didn't have to unmute.
I know she's probably not able to. I've been clicking on ask to unmute to see if that would.
Yeah, it should be.
But you were going to call on Yaakov first, so he came before me, so I yield the floor. And then if you want to get back to me, that would be fine.
All right, Yaakov, it's yours.
Just in terms of broad strokes, I always like seeing what do we do well. And living in Jacksonville the last 17, 18 years, one thing that I've always been extremely impressed about is we have in our middle school, we have this wonderful mitzvah program. And where it was originally started by Edith Horowitz, who we teach our kids mitzvah, and then we actually go and do the mitzvah. So if you're learning about, taking care of the elderly, then you afterwards go to the senior center, River Garden here, and they do a program with the seniors. Or if they're learning about Kibbud Hamet, then they go to the cemetery and they clean the cemetery. Or if it's respecting and dignity for disability, then they go to Mount Hermon and they work with the disabled kids. I found that these things leave a real lasting impression for our kids. And that's one thing that I've seen always, and it's in the concern of Tikkun Olam, right? The same idea, that anytime you do something that when you elevate things to a higher level, you're not just doing a mitzvah, but you're also teaching a concept that they can carry with them for their life. That always leaves a lasting impression for our kids. And I think that that's one thing that the conservative movement's done really well for the years. And I think if they continue, if we as a movement continue doing that stuff, I think that's going to really help a lot building lasting experiences for our kids. And like you were saying, Ramah Darom, for example, it's an experience. People go to Ramah and then it carries forward for many years down the road. These things are all. Another thing that our shul does is they have a siyum program, and then it ends with a trip to Washington, and they go to the APAC conference in Washington. And these things, 2 or 3 years, 5 years down the road, when the kids are already, finishing college, they still remember the things that were during their formative years. They may have forgotten certain prayers that they learned in Hebrew school, but they remember these lasting experiences. Another thing, and this is a Hillel thing, of course, is we used to talk about entry points. We used to talk about with the student, what's their entry point into Judaism. And I think that that's also something true with our members too, is that our members have many different entry points, many things. For some people, it's Jewish cuisine. For some people, it's the social and the cultural. For some people, it's spiritual. I think we have to look at all the different entry points to bring people in. And just one last thing that I was going to say is, aside from looking at what we do well, it's always interesting to look at what other movements do well. And so one of the things I've noticed with Chabad, they're very welcoming. Always welcome people to Shabbat dinners and get people involved. Come to our shul Simchas Torah and have a l'chaim, or whether it's they have their sukkah mobiles on campus where they're getting people to go into a sukkah and shake a lulav or an etrog. So I think that's one thing we could probably borrow from the Chabad, is to try and find ways to be more welcoming, to bring people in that may have perhaps gone away from the fold at some point, but bringing them back.
Very nice, Yaakov. Thank you, Yaakov. So yes, the two big points that I take away from this are experiential education, which is the pairing of more conventional textual type of learning with experiences that reinforce it, like what you mentioned at the visits to the elderly or to the cemetery and the camping. And then the other thing is learning from the success of others, which includes really the wonderful hospitality that we see in some circles, especially Chabad, which, to their credit, it is something that they put a lot of resources into, and they do really well. So I want to give them credit too. And I think our people also, practice hospitality. I'm sure your shul has a nice kiddush and welcomes people and has greeters and all that. But even so, they do it very well. Okay, let's hear from more people. So I see Etta and then Beth, I think.
This is Etta. I'm going to tell you that I was in 5th grade with Roger Lemus, which is why he's on this session right now. Hi, Roger, and I hope Pierre's doing okay. Anyhow, you were talking, and this in the very beginning, you were talking about people, coming to Judaism. I was amazed at how many rabbis, maybe a can or two, that had started off as non-Jewish and became a religious leader. I mean, that kind of blew my mind.
Me too.
There are people that were brought up not Jewish that have absorbed Judaism, sometimes better than I have, and I've been Jewish my entire life and went to the Hebrew school and Sunday school and everything at the center. But I'm curious, what is it? I run the Judaica shop in our synagogue. I get some of the strangest people coming in wanting to buy things. And I mean, before around Passover, somebody came in and they wanted to buy Passover decorations, like, Hanukkah decorations you hang on your wall. And I said to them, we don't sell things like that. I said, the idea, and I explained to them about Hiddur Mitzvah. I said, the decorations are making your table as beautiful as you can. Did they buy anything? No. But something. And then I had a lady come in. It was the biggest sale we've ever had. But she looked like she could have been from the country of India. She bought 7 tali tote.
Huh.
The sale was over $1,200. We've never had a sale like that. But I wish I could figure out how to get my picture on the thing. She was laying not on her shoulders, but across the top of her head. And I think she's buying them for all her daughters to wear for prayer. Where do these people come from?
Well, it's fascinating. And part of this is, we're living in the internet age, and so people are discovering many more cultures than they did before. You don't underestimate the role of popular culture, whether it was Fiddler on the Roof, which was incredibly popular in Japan and in Korea, and because the story was one of a traditional society threatened by modernity and trying to hang on, which was many people responded to. Obviously, shows like Shtisel and others have attracted a large audience that's not Jewish, that can relate to these people. With many synagogues beginning to stream their services, we're hearing, and we talked about this at the first session, that there's some people from other countries who are looking for access. And I think in general, a lot of people in the world don't really have access to many different types of religiosity. They only have really the main dominant religion of their town. And it's not so simple to go to a different, if you're a Hindu in India, you want to check out the Muslims, you can't just do that because, it can be dangerous. And so I think in some ways, this broad, diverse society we're in makes that possible. Anyway, I'm going to keep going because there are a bunch more hands up, and I see Beth Shorstein and it's not Barbara Safer. What's your first name? Okay, well, Barbara's screen anyway. So
Elliot Safer.
I got it. All right, so Beth, you're up next, Beth Shorstein.
Thank you. I have 2 daughters in their 30s, and they have struggled to find synagogues that have congregations that are welcoming to their age group. One was in Philadelphia, has just moved to Pittsburgh, and so she's got the opportunity to find such a congregation. The other one is in New York. You'd think no problem, but it's a problem because it's hard to get everywhere. And I don't know how how do people their age find congregations that have programs, congregants their age that are welcoming? Is there a process for that?
Yeah, it's a real problem, Beth, and I wish that there were a simple answer. There are, when I was in Detroit and when I was a young rabbi in that age group in my 30s, I started a young adult Minion that was not only for our members, it was like a citywide thing, but we did it in people's homes. We sometimes did it in the synagogue because we found that young adults really like to be with other young adults. It's not just a question of, do you have a program for them? Once they have children, then they start to become more focused on the children's experience, and it doesn't matter as much if they're older people, parents who are 5 or 10 years older than they are. But when they're just looking to socialize, they really want people their age. And if you do a program for singles, and older singles come, and we used to have that at Detroit too, where men in their 50s and 60s would be coming and trying to date these women in their 20s and 30s, and that obviously didn't go well. So in Philadelphia, in New York, in Pittsburgh, I don't know about Pittsburgh as much, to be honest, but in New York, obviously there are some very strong young adult communities, and in Philadelphia too, like BZBI in Center City, where one of my graduates is going to work, Abby Weber. So I think what you kind of have to look for is the neighborhoods where young adults tend to live. So like in New York City, it's going to be in certain neighborhoods, in Brooklyn especially, but also a little bit here on the Upper West Side. So the other thing I'll say to you, Beth, is that there are many organizations that have popped up which are offering activities which are more to the liking of your children's demographic. So I have an older daughter who's 26. She's not quite as old, not as your kids, but she loves making big Shabbat dinners with her friends, and they can have 10, before COVID, 10, 20 people around a table. They'll light candles and say Kiddush perhaps. They'll drink a lot. They'll eat a lot. They'll hang out for hours and hours and hours. Going to synagogue is not her thing. Maybe rabbi's kid, whatever. But I think it's a generational thing. I think their spirituality at the end of a long work week is going to be more about being around the table together and not necessarily going to synagogue. So I think we just have to.
Can I jump in? I'm sorry to interrupt, but both of them actually got drawn in because of Purim spiels. They're both artistic and performers, and they were asked to help, and that they loved it. They were involved for 2 months, and that was intergenerational. So right. I just feel like there's an opportunity there that we're just not tapping.
Well, you're right, and I'll just say there are some organizations, and there's some conservative organizations that are very focused on young adult outreach, and there's something called BASE now, BASE Hillel, which is for young adults. So one of my graduates, Jonathan Posner, is going to Chicago, I mentioned, to create one of those bases in a new neighborhood. He's getting startup money, kind of like Chabad. The Jewish Federation of Chicago has, I think, 3 of these different bases now around the city for young adults. The conservative movement in the DC area seeded something called the Den. So we're in Montgomery County, which is like the Maryland suburbs near DC, and now in Northern Virginia too, where we have just young adult programs. And it's interesting, the conservative synagogues each were contributing like $10,000 to help pay for this rabbi to be an outreach rabbi for young adults, right? And knowing that money might not necessarily translate into memberships right away, but it was an investment they were going to make in rejuvenating the youth scene. So there are things you can do. All right, there are a few more hands, and I want to get to them. Elliot Safer, I think, is next. But he's muted.
And Elliot. You should be able to.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, I'm Elliot. Barbara's here sitting behind me, using her screen. I wanted to go back to your initial comments, and I certainly admire and appreciate all the efforts of the recent graduates and rabbis and cantors. But it hit me, and maybe I was wrong, but they're all staying in basically large Jewish metropolitan areas, except maybe for Louisville.
I didn't mention Lexington, Kentucky. We've got more people going to Kentucky than anywhere else.
Okay. Well, again, I mean, the vast majority were staying in metropolitan New York area, stuff like that, and not. And is there something on an institutional basis that can help, reverse the trend of these of I won't say the demographics, but encourage the flourishing of conservative Judaism instead of dying out in what is the United States diaspora in many ways.
True. Look, it's a good point, Elliot, and this class is spread out from the West Coast, Berkeley, to Chicago, and the two people in Kentucky and Philadelphia, Maryland, DC, Virginia, New York, Connecticut, places like that. So they're spread a little bit, but Colorado, did I say Colorado? I'm not sure if I did, but the truth is that they kind of map on where the Jews are located. Now you might say, but there are a lot of Jews in Florida, none of them are going to Florida. True, but it depends on what jobs are open in any given year. To my recollection, I don't recall any jobs that were actually looking for our students this year in Florida. In other words, a shul that was looking for an assistant rabbi or a solo shul that was small enough that they'd be allowed to apply. There's been
Rabbi
one.
Nevins?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in and just add that I would say it really depends class to class. There are
Sure.
people from my class who are in, Des Moines, Iowa, and in the UK, and really in a small shul out in Vancouver. It kind of just depends on each class. So it's not that, and I came to Jacksonville, so.
Yeah, your class was remarkable in how geographically spread out it was. I'll also point out that with COVID, it was not so easy to interview, and not every shul wanted to hire somebody that they couldn't meet in person, and international shuls were, not hiring. So, I think this year was an unusual year, but it's not unusual that more of the jobs go to the places with the largest Jewish communities. And we usually do have some people wind up in Florida, but not this year. Okay, Susan's been waiting patiently. Susan Lubliner, so please.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to put in a plug for singing as prayer and not to discount that, because that is one of those entry points, as Yaakov said. And a few things. It was my path back to Judaism for sure. And I will also say that something that was stuck with me, that we had a visiting cantor years ago, before we got to Jacksonville. He was visiting for the high holidays, and he had told me that he had, I think, maybe a bit of dyslexia or whatever it was, and he had a great difficulty reading Hebrew, but he had discovered that when you sing the Hebrew, it slows it down a bit, and that was his entry point to becoming a Chazan. So I just wanted to add that plug. To me, and also I just think it's so spiritual when you do use your voice. To me, I always, try to sing as beautifully as I can, because I feel like I'm trying to, have God hear it, basically. That's my spiritual practice.
Thank you, Susan. You're obviously, I agree with you. And in fact, some of the vitality in the Jewish world today, specifically around music, the a cappella movement has been phenomenal, and has spread not just to Jewish college campuses, but to a lot of schools and synagogues. And then Joey Weisenberg, who's a musician based in Philadelphia, sort of helped to create the Rising Song Leader Institute. and an incredible collection of musicians have gathered, including one of my current rabbinical students named Deborah Sachs-Mintz, and another one of our recent students who Cantor Rosenblum, Rabbi Rosenblum, I knows, named Yosef Goldman, and they're remarkable musicians. And so I would recommend people search on YouTube for Joey Weisenberg and Yosef Goldman and Deborah Sachs-Mintz and Josh Warshawski. I mean, there's a whole generation now, I have this big echo now, of people who are actually writing new music, and it's very exciting music. Okay, I think that Daniel Wall had one question or comment, and then I think we're getting near the end of our time. So go ahead, Daniel.
This has been amazing. Thank you for doing this.
Welcome.
First, an observation for all of us. I'm trying to think what our demographic is here. We don't really cover that 20 millennials group that we seem to be talking about and how to engage. And that's an observation worth noting. By way of background, Daniel, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm a Camp Ramah Poconos grad. My Dav, about 40 or so with 2 bunks, boys and girls, through Zoom. We have stayed in touch this year because this is the time when parents are passing, and about 25 to 30 of us get together now. It's been about a half dozen times this year, it seems. And we lead a service or we just talk about things, but we come together, and it's Jewish, but it's not necessarily religious. It's coming together and sharing this commonality. But the diversity for those here, it's the same. Of that group, it's about what you described in that list. I'd say about of those 30, probably no more than a quarter still keep kosher at home. And no more than a quarter maybe go to services regularly. More identify Reform than conservative. Some don't, and there's been a handful of interfaith marriages. So it really is the full spectrum, but we still come together and we still identify as being Jewish. So it's not a negative, it's just an is. And so it's an observation. And the other comment I like to make and bring it back is, what is the common currency for our youth? And I was moved this year reading about some of the stories that are coming out from youth, teenagers, pre-Holocaust, and what they wanted out of life was to be famous, to be known. And I'm thinking that hasn't changed. And it's so much more easy to get sucked into the secularism of, I want to be famous, I want to be known, I want to feel relevant. And there's a certain sense that, and Rabbi Lebiner knows I've talked about this, but over the years, from the Northeast Jewish corridor where I'm from, that somehow, and take out the Orthodox, somehow that if you are of faith and believe in something that you can't prove, you somehow aren't as educated, as erudite, as relevant to those of, quote, us who know more. And that trend is not going to change anywhere in our lifetime. And that draws people away from practicing in the religion. I suspect it applies to other religions as well. So if you could comment on that, perhaps the observation of what's the currency to feel relevant, to feel meaningful, as it juxtaposes with if you're of faith, well, maybe you aren't really as intelligent or as educated as others who we would aspire to be. That's my thought.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I'm first of all, I'm really pleased to hear that story about your Eidah from Ramah Poconos and your reunion. And you should know Ramah Poconos is doing really well. It's got a head of camp named Joel Seltzer, who was also one of my early graduates, and they've expanded to inclusion, to having, I think they were one of the final camps to not have their own tikva program for kids with disabilities and developmental disabilities, and they have that now, and they're really flourishing. So you should feel proud of your camp. And when you were saying about how some of your camp mates are no longer observant, or they may be intermarried, listen, we all believe in freedom, and there's a bit of a tension here, right? We kind of want young Jews, and our children in particular, to do things the way we've done them. We also want them to be free, to be able to live where they want, and to do what kind of profession they want, and go to the school that they want, and to practice what they want, just like we all wanted and didn't want our parents to sort of completely control us. And so there's a bit of a paradox there. And so we need to be willing, if we love them and respect them, to let them express their Jewishness differently. So then you ask, well, what's the currency of? Obviously, there's no one answer to that, you know. And but I would say things that feel. Look, social justice is clearly the most dominant theme for young Jews. I'm not saying for all Americans, but if you're not speaking the language of social justice, then you're not really feeling relevant. And today that does mean, and I don't know what it's like in your part of Florida, because Florida's not always been as receptive to some of these ideas as other parts of the country, but you know, to racial equity and to certainly environmental activism, and certainly you know, issues of gender and sexuality, and sort of recognizing, you know, the difficulties that many people have had fitting in society. And so I think there's sort of a radical inclusion agenda. And that actually is in a bit of a crossroads. We're a bit countercultural to that, in that we want to have that plus a sort of a tight-knit community that has distinctive values and distinctive culture and actually distinctive marriage patterns. So we're trying
to... the paradox. That's exactly the paradox.
We're living this tension. I think it's, by the way, on the one hand, it's obviously harder. It'd be easier to be Orthodox and say those aren't Jewish values, or to be Reform and say we don't do the particularism anymore, we only do universalism. But and we're trying to do both. Still, I kind of feel like it's like the old saying of Hillel: if I'm only for myself, what am I? If I'm not for myself, who will be? You know, and so I think that balance is a noble balance, and ultimately I think it'll be a durable balance, because we Jews do want to care about the larger world, and we have within us. You know, within our own families, people who are gay, people who are, you know, all the different, and by the way, one of the things the Pew study finds is that among Jews under 30, a much higher percentage are Jews of color, either because of through intermarriage or conversion or frankly, or adoption, or frankly, just people who were always here in the Jewish community but weren't seen as much and now are seen more. So, I think we do have to continue in that path, while continuing also to teach love of our particular tradition and tell people there's no need to feel embarrassed about that. Let's be proud of being Jewish. And actually, I think there is something to be said that a lot of secular Jews are very proud to be Jewish, which is not the case with secular Christians and people who are secular from other religions, who still say, oh, I'm proud to be Christian, I just don't do anything about it. A lot of times they feel very allergic to the faith of their origin, whereas Jews often feel like, okay, I don't do what my Zeta did, but I'm still Jewish and I'm proud to be it. And so I think I see hope there, that these people can reclaim their Judaism. And the last thing I'll say about the generational thing, in Michigan, I remember people would look at the synagogue and they'd say, look, everyone's older. Where are the young people? And I used to say to them, look at these people who are here. Do you think when they were 25 that they were all in shul on Saturday morning? Right? Were they all in shul when they were 25? And they're like, oh, good point, Rabbi. No, they were doing whatever. They were shopping, they were golfing, they were doing whatever, or they were doing birthday parties for their kids. There is something about going to synagogue, especially on a weekend, that feels like an adult activity or a kid's activity, but not necessarily a young adult activity. And, you know, the young adults in my family on Saturday morning, they like to sleep till noon, you know, and what can I say? You know, they, I think that they'll eventually show up in shul, and if they don't like the shuls they find, then they'll build new ones. And I still have hope for that. So I'm going to end there. I know we went a little over our time. And back to you, Rabbi Lubliner and Rabbi Rosenblum. Thank you so much for this welcome.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. And I'm so glad that you did have this conversation, because it is a vital one that we need to have. How we can be a better synagogue and how we can be a better conservative synagogue are two questions that certainly have a lot of intersection, but there are also areas where either one is generic and the other is going to be very focused on our character as a conservative synagogue. So as we bring tonight's final session of the Sefer, saying Shabbaton, I guess I'll just keep saying it because God willing next year it will be a Shabbaton once again, is for us to think about what we need. The new buzzword is sustainability, to be able to be a movement that strives for greater literacy, involvement in Hebrew and traditional liturgy. What do we need and how do we need to educate the next generation of those who will carry on this distinctive approach to Jewish life? That's just a question. I'll let it hang in the air. And I invite you to email me or give a call to myself or Hazan or Rabbi Rosenblum, and for us to we're very happy and indeed eager to have those conversations. We are not going to return to the Judaism once upon a time. As much as the 1970s or 80s may seem idyllic, and I think in some ways, from the standpoint of our movement, they were. In other ways, not so much. But we are capable of creating a new dynamic reality. It will be different, but it will be dynamic in a different way. And we will do it with the help of everybody who is on tonight's Zoom session and our entire community. Please God. So I want to wish Rabbi Nevins well in his new endeavor. Look forward to seeing him in a week and a half as he receives, and I receive our honorary doctorates from the JTS. And they're all invited as well. And again, that invitation to have conversation is a real one. And I hope that we'll have other chances to talk about this. So Laila Tov to everybody. And we praise to your family for having created this program. And I wish you all a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Laila Tov.